Video 31. Will the Anthropocene simply replace our concept of the present in a longer term sense? As I've said before, because of the level the Anthropocene is occurring on, being related to the way periods of human history occur in themselves in ways that are linked to the geological ages, as they've evolved out of the periods of life on Earth, will people on all levels of society even realise what's happening, as most people will only have the most general concept of the world system that we live in at any particular point in time? For them, it's a case of wanting change to occur smoothly and that it is managed correctly. They can even understand that the UN system was introduced in the postmodern age, but it's not really necessary for them to understand how the whole ages change and every event that happens if all they're going to be doing is implementing policy changes from level 4 down. So that's even the specialist managers. The debate over the direction of it all comes down from the level 8s to the level 5s, which demonstrate the rules of the organization and give that to the leadership, and then they train the managers. So is there even any debate within society at all over how the ages change? This seems to be how it's done, and this seems to be how this current situation got to be where it is now, with the Israel-Gaza thing being a distraction from the Ukraine-Russia thing, as the world is actually run in such a duplicitous way due to the need to take the pressure off the superpowers. And somehow it seems at the moment this situation is justified by the fact that the Arab nations have all somehow been involved in the war against terrorism and also supported the non-aligned movement against the superpowers. So then they're not doing their bit, are they? Then they played the roles in the war on terror, and so did Russia, China, Israel, and the US and the UN all somehow do this together. It certainly means that the world order issue won't arise because all the world's protesters are now firing off on the Israeli-Gaza genocide, which has been made so bad. Was it deliberate? Was it deliberately made that bad so that everybody is now committed to this and nobody's asking any questions about how the world's actually run because they're so blinded by the way that events are happening? So are they all being organised in such a way which enables their organisers to effectively control them and actually bring everybody in line with the UN Security Council? I personally think the UN could take me into their offices right now and say, you see the global situation, right? You see the relationship between the superpowers heating up, and we can't stop them if they choose to go to war with each other. But more importantly, maybe they can't stop themselves under certain conditions at certain times, or if certain events occurred. So that's why we have to control the way this happens, because of what could happen to those nuclear bombs. And this is the price that we pay. And I say, well, okay, so I believe you. So Gaza is a turning point, but maybe not in the way most people think it is, as it is the point where the world system has had to stop and think about what it is doing. But what changed all went on behind the scenes. And Hamas conveniently went straight back to public executions of alleged Israeli collaborators right after the ceasefire began, sealing their fate. So what about the fate of us all? I mean, who's next? I mean, what will happen when the world finds out that nothing was done, that people knew, but nothing was done? Has it not been such a much shorter path, usually, from the public announcement of why a regime is corrupt to its replacement and the long years of oppression and justified secrecy which preceded it? It only seems to matter that people are well trained enough to do their jobs, and hence the Anthropocene can become a sprawling metropolis with dystopian values, which simply has to make enough profit to survive. But what if people realise the great hope there is for humanity in terms of improvement, in terms of wealth and social inequality and people doing the right thing and having a good feeling about society and being able to walk down the street without fear of crime? I can see that most people want this, but there are numerous people around the world, like arms dealers and politicians who are just rising to power, doing favours to people higher up the chain, which they hope will create enough continuity in the system to carry their careers up to a high level. But then things can only change as people evolve as a whole. So we may learn from the past in order to understand how things are developing today and adapt to changing circumstances in an active and dynamic sense, while we work on making the circumstances that people live in right. So back to today's world, in an immediate sense, we are now in a situation where the superpowers will have to work more closely together in order to avoid a major conflict between NATO and BRICS, which we can see they have been doing through the new working relationship between China and the US, and more recently through the meeting between Trump and Putin, in which they were both seen riding in the same car, which was the presidential limo, known as the Beast. And it looks possible that the West will be able to accept the Chinese annexation of Taiwan. As to resolve the relationship between the superpowers, we're going to start to needing to dissolve communism. And that is, in particular, its lack of internal opposition, in order to ensure the development of the new centre ground in global affairs, which means China wants to reincorporate the nationalists who fled to Taiwan after losing the civil war with Chairman Mao's Communist Party in the mid-20th century. China itself will have to sell the idea to its own citizens by saying it will make a much more powerful contribution to the world in the 21st century in terms of bringing the stabilizing influence it needs for the next phase, as expansion through the Belt and Road Initiative is bringing it into contact with other economies and hence political philosophies, ultimately those found in Western capitalism as it reaches out into the West, which will help move it away from the strong isolationist policies which allowed it to grow in the 20th century. Maybe it could even allow more of the worldwide internet instead of its heavily state-regulated version, as this would allow major cultural growth. In a reciprocal sense, this would also enable the world to further accept the American concept of the New World Order of the Ages, which is what the Ordos non seclorum, which is printed on the US dollar, literally translates to, along with Annuit Coeptis, which, combined with the Eye over the Pyramids, states that the world approves of their undertaking. The problem on the other side of the world is the way the European takeover of the Americas realised that they were going to create a new world order because, well, rather than just an extension of the old one, because of the addition of the whole new continent and how this was going to affect the relationship between Asia and Europe. And a large part of the Cold War was concerned with the Soviet Union challenging how exactly this new world order should replace the old. Now with the Soviet Union gone, China has become the top communist country, and so of course it must adapt to fill that role. But the emphasis must be allowed to shift to a new phase, and this will follow from the continual reinterpretation of Marxism and its contemporary meaning. Think about what the situation looks like to the UN, with those massive power blocks moving around, literally being the size of geological continental plates. No wonder they are having enough trouble managing the way those civilizations which exist on them are now moving forward. Hence, what nations need to bring in is the idea that people should be able to understand the world system, which obviously means facilitating the understanding of this for at least people who are in management, so that the idea can shift down the chain and it can become part of popular culture, because we can't deconstruct a problem without that. And basically this needs to happen as people are coming into contact with and employing people from other cultures with their own histories, university education, and hence business models, which means that blue sky thinking model of the West is coming into contact directly with the bottom-up model found coming from BRICS. It's kind of ironic name, really, isn't it, BRICS? So, because you build them. So, anyway, the rather than just teaching us about other countries in a general sense, as if they're just being foreign, then in the simple sense, we can see their ideas are different to our own, but ultimately the educated are now seeing the world as an economy connected through the internet, not so much a case of people being divided into nations, which it was at the start of the multipolar phase. So that means people who are good at analysing ideas will see the patterns that run through the whole anyway and use this to innovate new methods. Problems will still exist on the extremes of left and right, with the world order issue not just being a case of how people are expanded into East and West in different ways. Then there is the centre, with the problem of the Middle East and the relationship between the African Semitic culture having a relationship with the Indo-Aryan culture in Judah, the Islamic empires, and the conversion of the Mongols to Islam created a whole new story in Western Asia. While in the Far East, like China and Japan, despite China being ruled by the Mongols, it managed to retain its own culture. The effect of culture upon nations can be great. Judah, for example, chose the name God's chosen people as they solved the cultural problem of being exiled from Egypt, and then curiously wavered between periods of attempting massive expansion and being smashed back into an atom, attacking the massive empires of Mesopotamia, for example, like Babylonia and Assyria, and then being destroyed as a nation, then being exiled from a series of countries in Europe for undermining the Christian church, then the German Holocaust, then the creation of a new state, and now they're exerting absolute power over Palestine and Gaza, thus exhibiting this pattern over the whole of time. We should avoid stereotyping individuals. People should be looking more at what creates the national psyche, though, and affects how it interacts with others, as this is so deeply rooted in the culture that it affects everything that they do, and the relationship between their countries and the rest of the world. It's like Germany can't get over its sense of its own importance after the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire by Napoleon, because it was the most powerful empire in Europe for 900 years. British society still tends to produce people with a flavour of imperialism, as continuity lies at the bottom of their national psyche. Russians are always talking about their sacrifice. Perhaps if we could all learn to laugh at ourselves, the world would be a different place. Maybe if we realised more about who we were, we would not fall into the same old traps of being manipulated by politics on a national level and being made to be emotionally dependent by more highly educated people. The only thing is, this can only happen realistically as people at large learn more about global history and learn to see themselves in a broader context. But due to the inability of most people to see the importance of doing this, will the Anthropocene simply replace our concept of the present in the same long-term sense in which the ages have previously changed over time? I mean, now we can look back on previous ages and see the events that happened there and see that it's obvious that one thing should lead to another. But the people who are alive at the time always question, what's it all about? Where's it all going? Because the people who run the world at the time are much further ahead of their education system, which teaches us about the methods of the past in order to create new leaders. But they only teach people enough to help them develop their methods and skills. And then they become developed in the hands of professionals when it comes to the later stages and when it comes to handling real money and power. Currently, we are heading into a state of affairs which we solved a problem of the Gaza-Israel ceasefire in, but the world just keeps on ploughing through the day really in exactly the same way, with all the vested interests talking about how much they are completely innocent in terms of causing the problems which exist, and people unwilling to get involved in situations over which they have no influence, as corporations use ex-military contractors to provide security and gather intelligence on populations, politics and markets. For example, the unemployment programme in the UK, Universal Credit, uses methods like the one-way mirror technique of interviewing clients, interrogation techniques like repeated questioning, and the fact that they can stop money being paid to people so they lose their food and housing in the event of non-cooperation with the programme as leverage. Techniques which evolved out of research into human psychology, such as the US MK Ultra CIA mind control program, which ran from 1953 to 73, which itself replicated experiments conducted at Nazi concentration camps at Auschwitz and Dachau, which, in the words of one laboratory assistant to Dachau scientist Kurt Plotner, was designed to eliminate the will of the person examined. The US version, designed to interrogate Soviet spies, was run by Sidney Gottlieb, born to Jewish Hungarian parents in New York in 1918 and died in 1999, who was an American chemist and spy master who headed the Central Intelligence Agency's 1950s and 60s assassination attempts. It was preceded by Project Artichoke, which also used illegal methods, including psychoactive drugs and various forms of abuse to interrogate and used US and Canadian citizens as unwitting subjects. As the Milgram experiment on the effect of authority and conformity shows, we must not forget to learn carefully about where our methods are coming and the lessons of the past, and not just fall into the same trap of naively believing they're simply designed to solve the current problem, as this is exactly what has caused so many abuses of power. The CIA and other veterans have themselves claimed to have been given counseling programs, hypnosis and meditation to help them focus. After all, how are we supposed to keep fighting for the same country again and again, regardless of our own personal views? Such people say that they find themselves having to get rid of other thoughts, caused by the fact that other perspectives might exist, or even might equally be as valid, at least from the point of view of other people who are human beings like ourselves. Is this why governments commit war atrocities? So, in the retaliation, the two sides learn to see the other as animals. The very idea that there is a need for a program to help people cope with the implications of the job they do simply must raise some questions in itself. On the UK program, there is an idea which is repeated, that only finding a job sets them free of the program. And what is exactly written on the gates of Auschwitz? The exact words, Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free. A list of controversial CIA operations, including Operation Paperclip, which recruited the Nazi scientists, can be found on Wikipedia. Additionally, what does it say about the current British system? That it now contains such extremes in its own politics that it must incorporate communism, which it did through the work placement program, which was managed using a method used in Soviet labor camps, which I wrote a book on in the 2010s, which is available on Amazon, and Nazism, which I suppose if both parties are legal in the UK, then it must somehow incorporate this into what it regards as being normal. So what does this say about the way populations have been managed since World War II? It is not only a developing world which has had its problems, and it does go to show that there is a problem with the UN system, in the sense that it cannot be seen as the complete solution to everything, even though the basic idea is to extend it into being that, from just coping with the problem in the basic sense of the shape of human civilizations, to take the world further and into a properly organized age, using its past obviously to justify its methods. But there comes a certain point where the more we are solving that problem, the less incentive there is to solve it any further. And while the new Anthropocene age becomes the justification to create new issues, it seems that the world model is simply inflating with no real control. The most obvious problem is that after the Soviet Union dissolved, Islamic terrorism arose as the biggest opposition to the way things were, something the world system coped with by calling it the Islamic Revolution and categorizing as a period/event in itself without really considering the fact that its implications have not played themselves out yet, as if this could be contained through the war on terror. Hence, we're still having the problem of connections in the world system, which are creating dynamic tensions stronger than the system itself, which is becoming a new mystery people can explore. Given the shape the world order itself has made as it has evolved, has been the main issue of the postmodern era, in which the UN system has existed. It has put the focus more on oversight than predicting the way events are happening on the ground, which we can see as the Western blue sky thinking, which is precisely what it was before World War II. It was the European empires, the meta-narratives of which we had to break down by shifting more towards the individual. And while capitalism was having trouble reforming, it was actually communism found its justification for existence in pushing the world towards that. even though it valued the collective more. And hence the fundamental issue resolved through the multipolar phase is that of being then the equal rights and responsibilities of those individuals, but it has involved increased surveillance and interrogation of populations, treating the problem of wanting to change things fundamentally as like a mental illness, so that financial and corporate interests could essentially keep functioning in the same way, which is what led to the 1% phenomenon. But then the way governments have tried to control societies, and especially the way people think, has created institutionalized corruption, which the Soviet Union was specifically criticized for, a problem it solved with frequent purges of ideological opposition within its leadership. But there is no such mechanism in the West, so the issues here just seem to keep growing and building with no way of addressing them. As I've said before, perhaps the real problem is that ultimately nobody is to blame, because of the way the shape of history has created society, and this is why both political issues and practical questions seem to be passed around within the system like hot potatoes, with entire departments trying to blame each other in the battle to deny failure and win more government funding. But they never seem to solve the problems for which they are established completely, as this would mean the end of their existence. Hence, the way they're set up and managed means they function within the context of the social system, and not in any objective sense. So the global issue cannot be discussed, only the job they were created to do. So how do we flip the script here? Because how do we introduce a debate over the way things are run to people who are not supposed to be able to comment on it? Our government's now trying to control the idea of the Anthropocene even. It would seem logical this is where the situation would go, because of inability to have completely solved the question of the shape of the previous age and the fact that politics is now moving into space. So if you think about it, then that leaves a lot of unresolved issues on the ground, which can be solved by creating a new level of authority, the space agency or the need to place more importance on the new journey which people are on. And this means that the people at the bottom again are left out. They have no voice, they have no representation, and they can't create any. The idea that we are in the Anthropocene can be proven, but then there is all the other material which goes along with that, including all the social sciences stuff, which it seems is never going to be addressed by any government, and all the stuff that goes along with government approval, like how exactly should we proceed. And then there was the divide between how the educated people in government understand the world and how they announce this to people, and the version different sections of society get from their own newspapers, magazines and journals. And on top of this, China were one of the big five, where the Anthropocene working group has moved to, that is the Chinese Academy of Science in Beijing, and it's become home to the entire International Union of Geological Sciences. So this would appear to be a universal guarantee that the case for the Anthropocene will be proven, but maybe not in the way that people would want it. Maybe in the most basic sense, and then the idea to be heavily controlled politically and simplified, so that people only get the most basic idea of it, when it appears that the problem with the world system is that they need the exact opposite. They need to understand more fully about the situation, or the world is just going to tank forwards when we could have addressed the issue. So, it seems improportionate. It does look like the time for reform of the superpowers and the UN Security Council has come because of the Gaza genocide and its global coverage. And that is at least what can come out of that. So, on the other hand, then we need to explain the situation, and I think people need to understand why it's all happened. And governments are really not in so much trouble if they can admit that. So, anyway, I think maybe China is slow to realize the power of the World Wide Web due to the isolation of their own, which blocks out most foreign websites. The superpowers themselves seem to have settled down into a pattern where their governments only speak of the success that they're having in terms of running their highly advanced civilizations, having buried the actual way departments function under massive levels of compartmentalization and bureaucracy, ensuring that any crisis is not only kept under control, but the whole of government acts like a wet blanket to keep the fire down. Even the Ukraine war in Europe is seen in Russia as a special military operation, as the Kremlin calls it, with the vast majority of the population almost entirely unaware of how it looks from the other side. But with the internet, news will spread fast and governments might not realize how fast people can catch up with governments in their own ways, which is why I think a complete explanation everyone can share is necessary due to the deep divides in geopolitics, creating everyone's own exclusive version of events. If we look at the situation involving the world order as it has evolved all along, it has always been spreading out as it evolved in terms of levels of technological and social development, rather than a linear progression of ideas which can be controlled. So it's now precisely that overview which people need to realize, owing to satellites and the internet, as even though we could all say the Earth and each have our own unique concept of it, it's still the same Earth. The objective term is real, and it means that we can all know that we're relating to the same thing. Hence, we can have shared concepts of things which develop and improve along with society, and also have our own beliefs and ideas about things. It's not just a case of everything being different perspectives or everything having to be all one truth. In the ancient world, differences between perspectives were more absolute, as human societies were just emerging and people had not yet learned to understand a concept of the world. So it was during this period that we established laws and states with administrative systems which granted citizens freedom and rights and created literature. The concept of identity, therefore, goes all the way back here into Persia, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and even the way that the world order situation spread south into Ethiopia as it developed, which we can see from their copy of the Bible. Hence, we had individual egos before we even had a concept of the world, something many people are struggling to transcend now. But really, where's the incompatibility if we can align ourselves with the interests of the whole?